Many thanks
Go on.
for kindly giving me this wonderful opportunity to share my thoughts in this international seminar. My topic, as you all know, end of post-colonialism. And many of the participants might suspect that is going to be a complete demolition of the citadel of post-colonialism, and may be reminded of Antony's speech in Julius Caesar. I have come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. But I have not really come here to bury post-colonialism. However, I would like just to rehash some of the very well-known points of beginning related to post-colonialism. In the first place, we would refer to Edward Said's Orientalism, which was published in 1978. It is considered to be the point of inauguration of this great movement of post-colonialism. Said, in fact, wanted to formulate a discourse by which European culture was able to manage and produce the Orient politically, sociologically, ideologically, scientifically, and of course, imaginatively. There might be many students who might be participating in this conference. So I'll just very briefly make a rehash of some of the important texts that were produced around that time. I would also refer to two symposia which were organized in the University of Essex in 1982-84, and the publication of the proceedings of that symposia as Empire and its Other. Here, Spivak and Bava inaugurated the beginning of a colonial discourse as a legitimate line of inquiry. I would also refer to Professor Bill Ashcroft, Helen Tiffin, and Gareth Griffiths' very important book, Empire Writes Back, which at that time almost became a textbook for all those who try to understand what post-colonialism really means. It was very popular in India, and many of the Bill Ashcroft actually came to Burdwan University and stayed here for 2-3 days. And many of the participants of that particular talk were worried about the question, how could Bill Ashcroft suddenly think that he should be able to write such a book? So on behalf of the participants, I asked him a question. Well, Bill, what is it that you suddenly decided to work on this area and wrote a very wonderful book? Bill Ashcroft simply smiled and said, well, things were very much there happening, and I wrote the book. There was Ngugi wa Thiong'o also, Decolonizing the Mind, 1986. This is a very important rejoinder to the study of post-colonialism. If we look at the beginning of the book, Decolonizing the Mind, you'll see that he is referring to a poets' meet, organized by the British Council. At the time, Ngugi wa Thiong'o used to write poems in English, and he was invited to that particular poets' meet. But he was very surprised to see that many of the very major poets writing either in Gyuku or any other native languages were not at all present. So he could realize that it's meant for only those who write in English. So he could once again realize that there is, of course, a kind of contrapuntal relationship between the West and the rest. However, in 1988, a special issue of Critical Inquiry was published, and it questioned the problematics of race, writing, and difference. And then from New Delhi, Subaltern Studies, Writings on South Asian History and Society was published in 1988, it sought to rectify the elitist bias of imperialism. I would also refer to Robert Young, Colonial Desire, Hybridity in Theory, Culture and Race. I'll come back to him later as well. But right now, I would say that Robert Young also came to Burdwan University and stayed there for around 15 days, thanks to British Council at the time. And Robert Young, actually, as he was younger and me too as well at that time, we were very close. And he was very, very engaged with accumulating knowledge about India. And Robert Young, in this book, very important book, Colonial Desire, tried to determine the epistemic variables contained in a flexible regime constructed by the West. And then also there was Dipesh Chakraborty. He started with his colonial world and then provincializing Europe, post-colonial thought and historical difference, which was published in 2000. He wanted to show Europe as the sovereign theoretical subject. Other histories occupy a position of subordinate, and history of Europe works as the master narrative. In other words, there is always an attempt to construct a hyper-real Europe. The reification of epistemic antinomies of knowledge and power, showing the evolving locations of nation-state, the developing subgenres of diaspora, exile, homing, dehoming, etc. I would also refer to Frantz Fanon, but he comes much earlier. Perhaps he foreshadowed the problematic of post-colonialism happening in 1978, but his first book, Black Skin, White Masks, 1952, and then The Wretched of the Earth was published in 1961. So there have been so many others who have been actually contributing very vigorously to the dissemination of post-colonial studies at the time. But at the same time, there had been controversies. There had been debates. I can just refer to Terry Eagleton versus Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak in the 1980s. Eagleton wrote a critique of post-colonial reason toward a history of the vanishing present in 1999. It was, in fact, a response to Spivak's essay, Three Women's Texts and a Critique of Imperialism. Here, Spivak took over Jen Eyre, White Sargasso Sea, and Frankenstein. Eagleton developed two distinctive charges, number one, complicity, and number two, obscurantism, and considered post-colonialism as the gaudy supermarket, helping the import of the third world intellectuals to Euro-American academies. Again, Colin Wright, while commenting on the Eagleton-Spivak debate, wrote, "To whom is Spivak speaking?" and asked, why did Spivak choose the European texts to realize this? I would not comment on such debates because you know that this happens. For instance, I can refer to Thomas Keneally, who wrote Schindler's Ark, and it got the Booker Prize, and he came to Calcutta to attend the Calcutta Book Fair, and he gave the inaugural address. Now, very interestingly, in that inaugural address, he said, well, it is very difficult to get the Booker Prize from Australia or from the Euro-American academies, but, well, it is very easy if you write wonderfully well in Asia, or best if you write from India. I would once again not comment on this. So there had been such, misapprehension, confusions, debates, but I would particularly refer to the PMLA issue 2007, May 2007, where we find a special issue, which is a special issue of end of post-colonial theory. Contention over the status of post-colonial theory in the geopolitical present. This was the essential point of contention. Sidney Smith and Jennifer Wenzel organized a panel discussion in the University of Michigan in 2006. They wanted to show, at least indicate, the exhaustion of postcolonialism as a theoretical paradigm. I don't agree with the kind of view that Arif Dilrik, um, pointed out, but I can refer to his statement, but I'm not with that statement. Arif Delrick said, postcolonialism begins when the third world intellectuals have arrived in the first world academy, and it ends when every department has hired a postcolonialist. Jennifer Wenzel looks at a specific time frame, end of Cold War, that is 1990s, and the 9/11. She refers to Niall Ferguson's very famous book, Empire, How Britain Made the Modern World, published in 2009. It's a huge story of imperialism, but contained in a sort of a slim volume of 400 about pages. He shows the rise and fall of the empire. The post 9/11 has reframed a new narrative of expansionist Manichaean foreign policy, implying a failure of post-colonialism. Even we should look at the official administrative standpoints. In 2004, a responsible officer of the notorious Bush administration said, "We are an empire now. And when we act, we create our own reality. And while you are studying that reality, we will act again, creating other new realities." Let me also give you another statement. This was made by Stanley Coates. Stanley Coates actually was a neoconservative member of the Education Committee of the US House of Representatives. He generally blamed Science Orientalism as promoting area studies that wrested knowledge from the service of power. That means he wanted to create a kind of balance between knowledge and power, so that the hegemonic power can continue. He also blamed postcolonial studies as, number one, extremist, number two, anti-American apologia for terrorism. Very funny. Again, Homi Bhabha, while writing the foreword to the translation of The Wretched of the Earth 2004, recognizes the contributions of postcolonial theory. But he points out that the postcolonial theorists are working on wrong politics now, and they should reframe the decade-long debate on social equity and justice, because they have almost exhausted themselves all too much on culture wars, identity politics, politics of recognition, representation, etc. Homi Bhabha, therefore, radicalizes the study of postcolonial theory to some extent. Even Edward Said, at the end of his life, moved away from the celebrated postcolonial group, claiming that postcolonialism has become a misnomer that has scattered itself without recognizing the threats of neoliberalism, imperialism, multiple structures of dependency, and so on. Suji Tharu, she is attached with the School of Critical Humanities, University of Hyderabad, contends that Said's foundational text is, in ultimate analysis, not about the Orient, but about the Euro-American academy and the power-knowledge axis of those institutions. Even Spivak seems to have suffered a theoretical tension, as she constantly wavered among multiple critical choices like feminism, Marxism, deconstruction, and at one point even rejected herself to be categorized under the term postcolonial, and even considered it to be rather dated in an age of globalization. You can refer to her book, Death of a Discipline, published in 2005. Critics have even questioned the location of postcolonial geography. Fernando Coronel, for instance, categorically says that it has always the privilege of the Western academies. Latin America was never colonial in the sense India or Indonesia had been, he points out. Then Mamadou Diouf categorically says that postcolonialism failed to account for the contemporary African condition. Ama Ata Aido, the Ghanaian writer, said postcolonialism was irrelevant to the United States. The power syndromes exerted by England and France and to the imperial dominations of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And when the narrative is applied to the rest of the world, it's a mere, very strong word, a strong phrase, pernicious fiction. It's a mere pernicious fiction. Post-colonialism has been institutionalized by now, yielding repetitive theoretical acts, a rehash of theoretical autonomy enjoyed by the post-colonial theory roughly for about 3 decades, if we, of course, consider 1978 as the inauguration of post-colonialism. I myself also felt very, very tired when I used to teach in the University of Burdwan, and we had to take research interviews. Most of the research candidates would come up with either exile or diaspora or identity or representation, the same theories with different texts. So I was getting tired of this. However, Professor Hamid Dabashi is the professor of University of Columbia. He is the professor of Iranian studies. Wrote an article, Can Non-Europeans Think? Here he stands firmly against the post-colonial critique of building up an alliance of academic thinkers in terms of European paradigms. In fact, he was writing it as a response to the Barcelona professor Santiago Zabala's book or assessment of Zizek as a philosopher. In his later book, Dabashi's later book, The Arab Spring, The End of Postcolonialism, published in 2011, he challenges the craft of postcolonialism. I quote his statement. We need to overcome the anxiety of Orientalism and shift our lens to our evolving history and stop trying to explain things so that fictive white man who sat in Edward Said's mind for a lifetime, that fictive white man is dead. He was never alive. He was a chimera manufactured by a post-colonial age. I will not comment on this. I would rather refer to Martin Heidegger's essay called The End of Philosophy and the Task of Thinking, published long back in 1969, in which he considered the idea of end not in a negative sense, nor as a stopping or termination. In fact, it foreshadows further epistemic reorientation and transformation. Before I proceed to elaborate on this, I should try to discuss some of the views of the French theoretician Jean-François Bayard. In 2011, Bayard wrote an essay, Postcolonial Studies, a political intervention of tradition, in which he calls for reviewing the French contribution made much earlier in 1950s by Aimé Césaire, Leopold Senghor, Albert Memmi, Franz Fanon, etc., than what has been done later by the Anglophone world. I will not enter into this controversy. This is a controversy between the Anglophone and the Francophone claims on postcolonialism. He thinks that postcolonial studies is trapped in its contradictions. While claiming to be subaltern, it assigns to itself autonomy, self-reflexive appropriation of political modernity, though wavering in terms of its real ability to do it. He says, postcolonial studies reduces the action of the subalterns to a ritual of affliction in the service of a morbid cult of redemptive suffering. But it immediately brought about distinctive objections, especially from Robert J.C. Young. Robert Young wrote a very wonderful essay called Bayard's Broken Kettle. Here he sharply hit back in his response to Bayard's thesis by calling his ideas over-exaggerated, oversimplified, and overgeneralized, and even localized and parochial. He continues the theoretical battle in his next essay, Postcolonial Remains. Young laments, I quote it in full, the desired dissolution of post-colonial theory does not mean that poverty, inequality, exploitation, and oppression in the world have come to an end. Only that some people in the US and French academies have decided they do not want to have to think about such things any longer, and do not want to be reminded of those distant, invisible contexts which continue to prompt the transformative energies. Transformative energies. This actually brings me to another aspect of this. What then is the nature of this transformation? I think the world as it had been in the 80s or the 90s is not what it is now. In the post-Cold War period, since 1990s, the rise of globalization discourse moved towards a new development. The rise of international mobility, political and economic transactions and investments, development of communication technologies, new market economy, etc., brought about an unevenness in socio-political, cultural, and economic reality. Even the communist China inaugurated the globalization policy for free trade and commercial expansionism. So long ignored as the global South, many South Asian and Southeast Asian nations opened up multiple forms of exchange and transactions. Even India, though a little later, realized the nature of this global transformation and moved forward to developing a neoliberalist approach by formulating Lucist policy, later transformed as Actist policy, further transformed as Act West policy. Many of these countries began to ink pacts and treaties in order to strengthen political, military, and economic networks in the form of joint naval and military exercises, in terms of FDI, foreign direct investment, or AFTA, ASEAN Free Trade Area, or NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, cultural exchange programs, etc. As a result, the concept of bipolarity or contrapuntal positioning of nation states began to disappear, being replaced by multipolar international relations. This new socio-political paradigm comes to be further celebrated by Robert Gilpin's book, Global Political Economy, published in 2011. In Gilpin's analysis, nation states and market zones are embedded in larger political, cultural, and social structures. There is therefore a tendency among all nations to emerge as global players. As far as literary and cultural praxis is concerned, there is a growing tendency among the academies to be part of a larger design of global humanities and social sciences. In the new global world order, the transnational corporations, the multinational corporations have begun to spread their tentacles all over the world, thereby leading to the creation of, one instance, sweatshop industries. What is sweatshop industries? Cheap labor. The production engaging cheap labor in the third world nations. The creation of sweatshop industries in the third world, even facilitating migration of third world laborers to other parts of the world. It is increasingly becoming difficult to identify a coalescing pattern by which to interpret multiple divergent issues. The economic crisis in the global order, state-sponsored genocide and terrorism, displacement and migration, giving rise to stateless people as it happened with the Syrians, the migration from Syria to Europe, etc. The Cold War and its end leading to new challenges in international relations, rapid labor migration from developing nations. Despite the growing trade of reformation of political and economic trajectories across the world can hardly free itself from the challenges which are intrinsically disparate and divergent. There is a growing tension, for instance, in South China Sea in terms of projecting military and naval powers, which involves some nations of South and Southeast Asia, with intermittent interventions of the US and other European nations. Again, the Chinese initiative of OBOR, One Road, One Belt, One Road, for strengthening economic relations has been looked upon as a covert measure to build an economic empire, as also to use it as a new methodology for aggression. Recent incidents of racist violence in the US, which is continuing, or the Chinese attack on the democratic agitation in Hong Kong, yes, it is continuing. The ongoing terrorist activities in Yemen, yes, continuing right now. Unrest and violence created by Libyan Nationalist Army, LNA, in Libya, the recent border standoff between China and India, not yet resolved. The Arab Spring, starting a few years back and still continuing in a scattered manner, are instances of ongoing culture clashes, which develop into attempts for building new power regimes. We are grateful to post-colonial theorists for drawing attention to new narratives of cultural production, finally being almost omnivorous in its claims for including all domains, almost all domains of human knowledge. The post-colonial theoretical paradigms may therefore be reconstituted or retransformed to make sense of the new problematic of connectivities. It's time now we had revised the earlier thesis and moved forward to transnationalism or transculturalism as a revised theoretical formation. Transnationalism may be regarded as a distinct phase of global modernity in terms of restructuring the post-colonial thesis. With the rise of globalization, Edward Said, in his Culture and Imperialism, seems to revise his earlier thesis of post-colonial binaries and states no one can deny the persisting continuities of long traditions, sustained habitations, national languages, and cultural geographies. But there seems to be no reason except fear and prejudice to keep insisting on their separation and distinctiveness, as if that was all human life was about. This revisionary stance of the post-colonial critic is also noted in Arjuna Appadurai, who seems to discover new formations of cultural dimensions in the age of globalization. Then Arianna Dagnino, the professor of cultural studies in the University of Sydney, appreciates Appadurai's revisionary approach to cultural forms as irregular, boundaryless, and without any clear structure. The transnational as well as transcultural critic Wolfgang Welsch refers to an interesting citation from Karl Zuckmayer's The Devil's Jungle, in which he posits a view of cultural mixes and permeation and concludes that all races of people with cultural permeation may conduce to a new form of transcultural celebration. I quote, they were the best of my friends, the best in the world. And why? Because the nations mixed there, like the waters from the spring and brooks and the rivers that flow together in one great living stream. I'm very much reminded of what Tagore said much earlier. এই ভারতের মহামানবের সাগর তীরে. Certain factors should be kept in mind in terms of the emergence of the thesis of transnationalism and transculturalism. The rise of global or international political economy largely developed a decentering of national economies through restructuring of a new global world order. The traditional segmental political as well as economic structure underwent a total disruption through new negotiations of power structures in Asia, Europe, and America. As a result, the sites of political and economic centers moved rapidly towards innovative mobility and expansion. This neoliberal economic order in the age of globalization gradually moved towards the obliteration of traditional borders. Though global political economy has been largely associated with trade and monetary relations, it raised a definitive awareness of territorial border crossing and transnational interconnectivity. Since 1990s, this global scenario in politics. One minute, please. in politics and economy largely impacted on traditional perceptions of nation state and cultural segmentation. The perspective of transnational ideology began to be largely initiated by the German theorists like Frank Schulz, Engler, or C.C. Held. Similarly, in the upper regions of Northern Europe, it began to be significantly canvassed by the Nordic network of scholars. It's pertinent. There are so many other informations. I just skip this. I'll rather come to Arianna Dagnino, who looks at the present age as fluid, neo-nomadic, proto-global times. Thus, transnational critics try to show how local or regional modernities move into a transnational environment. Dagnino comments that major institutes worldwide promote the study of representation of transnational culture and communities. This confluential natures, this confluential nature of culture not only critiques the dichotomous nature of nation state, but also tries to reshape the so-called national collective imaginaries. This cosmopolitan vision in the age of transnational political, social, and cultural processes, the dominant post-colonial discourses come to be radicalized and transformed. The central argument of the project is that post-colonial theory, through its long run of around 33 decades, reveals new twists and turns. It seems that post-colonial phase proves to be inadequate in certain ways in interpreting the recent cultural perceptions. But to quote T.S. Eliot, in my beginning is my end, in my end is my beginning. So there is no end or beginning. It is always a continuum and transformation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm not sure if everybody can hear me.
Hello?
Yeah, am I audible?
I just can't hear you. That is my problem.
Okay.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
You can hear me, sir? Can you hear me? Sir, your microphone is muted. Sir's microphone is muted. I'm not very sure whether people can hear me. Surely you can hear me, but I'm not very sure about the others.
Yeah, I can hear you
We
clearly.
lost video from sir as well, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not very sure whether Jyoti can hear me as well.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I can hear
Yes,
you.
sir.
That's why I held it to my ears. You
Okay.
will not be able to see me. Yes.
Sir,
So
Jyoti
thank you,
is going to take
Aparajita and
over.
all others.
So Jyoti is going to take
Yes.
over after this. But I just want to say that every time you speak, sir, it's a journey of wonderment, and it's a journey of, we just marvel at the level of your knowledge. And we are so lucky to have had you as a teacher. This is something that I want to say on a public platform so that people can understand what a great teacher you are, as well as a great speaker. Thank you, sir, as always, for being
Okay.
there for us
Thank
whenever
you.
we need you.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful
Thank you
lectures.
very much.
Wonderful
See you
lectures.
again. Okay.
Thank you,
Wonderful
sir,
lectures.
for enriching us
Okay.
and inspiring us as
Thank you.
always. Thank you, sir.